This is Popular Front, a podcast focused on the niche details of modern warfare and underreported conflict with me, Jake Hanrahan. Today we're speaking to Alex Newhouse. He's the digital lead at the Centre on Terrorism, Extremism and Counter-Terrorism at the Middlebury Institute. And today he's going to be telling us about the Boogaloo Bois, a non-cohesive group of young men who are basically running around the US protests, armed right now, calling for war with the state. They're anti-authoritarian, some of them are Nazis, and some of them don't really know what they're doing. They're just kind of having a laugh. So it's a very interesting situation. There's been a lot of misinformation, but we're going to get down to who they really are. If you like Popular Front, please do consider supporting us at patreon.com/popularfront. It's a weird situation, right? You've got all these clashes, the Black Lives Matter, anti-police violence, justice for George Floyd protests, whatever you want to call them, kicking off in America. A lot of the protests are getting violent. And the reason I was interested in this Boogaloo Bois side of things is because I feel like the media is honestly being quite disingenuous on both sides. So it's either the left is saying, oh, all of these Boogaloo Boys are actually Nazis, which I know for a fact is not true. Or you've got the kind of right wing pretending like all of the Boogaloo Boys are angels and none of them actually are racist, which I know is also not true. From my own research, there is definitely like a kind of racist far right branch to them, and then there's the right libertarian branch. But before we get into all of that media situation, maybe you can start by explaining what is the Boogaloo, what are the Boogaloo Boys? I know it's not a cohesive movement, but it seems to be many things to many people. Maybe you can start there. Like, what is the Boogaloo?
Yeah, so at the top, the term Boogaloo comes from a meme that was going around on 4chan a while back that referred to the Civil War II electric Boogaloo. And from that, a movement sort of expanded on various 4chan message boards. If we were to characterize the Boogaloo movement with any sort of one, overarching ideology, what we would say is that it's a right libertarian accelerationist movement, sort of in the style of 90s era militias in the United States. What that means is essentially it's a group of people who are anti-government, generally anti-police, who want to either participate in or witness or bring about government collapse, societal collapse. And they believe that is the key towards overthrowing tyranny, destroying authoritarianism in the United States, achieving personal liberty, that sort of thing. So the uniting factor among all of these different factions within the Boogaloo movement is that they all ascribe to this sort of accelerationist libertarian philosophy. What that means in effect is you have the people who literally subscribe to the let's bring about a second civil war, usually between liberals and Republicans, or liberals and conservatives, or the government and the people. Sometimes all that means is that these people are itching for armed confrontation with police. There are Facebook groups and communities who are trying to walk that back even further and say, no, all we mean is that we want to have armed protests and protect First Amendment, freedom of speech rights with our Second Amendment rights to right to bear arms. But on the other side of that, you have people who subscribe to the ideology that the Boogaloo actually refers to a race war. So this is when we start getting into the very factionalized characteristic of this movement. But at the top, really the uniting factor is they all itch for this sort of confrontation, societal collapse, some sort of revolutionary action or event that might take place in the United States.
Right, and where did that word come from, though? Even that is quite unusual, right? Like Boogaloo, what's that about?
So the term Boogaloo actually dates back to the 80s. There was a 1980s movie called Breakin' 2 Electric Boogaloo, and in the early 2000s, that Electric Boogaloo term sort of caught on among internet communities as a meme to refer to essentially anything. So anything that has a second act, a sequel, would be called, it would be called, like, let's say Revolutionary War II Electric Boogaloo, or like Protest 2 Electric Boogaloo. Basically, it was applied to anything. And this has been happening for years. I think it first started popping up on like Reddit and 4chan in the early noughts, early 2000s. But the application to civil war really started in 2017, 2018.
Right, and why why do they all wear like Hawaiian shirts? You know, it seems to be the kind of Boogaloo uniform, if you like, is like jeans, Hawaiian shirt, plate carrier, and an assault rifle. How did that happen?
So my best guess about where this sort of arose is from the paranoid aspect of this whole movement. So because these people think that the FBI is watching them, they are, and tech companies are watching them at all times. They're constantly concerned about having their communities on the internet taken down or censored or what have you. So they're developed this sort of in-group language among the Boogaloo movement to refer to the Boogaloo without actually saying Boogaloo, because tech companies caught on to this in late last year. So they started referring to themselves as the Big Igloo Boys or the Big Luau Boys. And so Big Luau in particular caught on. And so because at luau's in Hawaii, you often have pig roasts, they thought that that was clever.
Like the police roasting the pigs.
Exactly. So the whole, let's roast the pigs over an open spit thing, referring to the police. That is how that caught on. And so since all these communities were called the Big Luau Boys or whatever, they started wearing Hawaiian shirts to mark themselves as adherents to this movement.
So what, I mean, how would you describe it then? It's not a group. This is what is starting to really piss me off. Now I'm seeing a lot of kind of left-wing activists just saying, well, that's a member of the Boogaloo. And it's like, that's not what the Boogaloo is, right? It's not a cohesive movement. The same way Antifa is not a cohesive movement. How would you describe it?
Yeah, the best way to describe it is as a movement. I keep comparing them to the Patriot movement that was prominent in the 90s and 2000s in the United States. It's a little more accelerationist than the Patriot movement ever was. They are far more willing to actually escalate and confront police with violence. But that is the sort of idea. You have this overarching movement that has a loose ideology, a loose unifying ideology. But within that movement, you have a bunch of different subgroups, small communities that organize primarily on Facebook, but also on Telegram and Twitter and still to this day, 4chan. So it is similar, I guess, in that aspect to Antifa, where it's a broader ideology, frame of mind, worldview that unites these disparate groups.
Yeah, and we've started seeing these Boogaloo Boys turn up at the protests armed. Maybe you can talk to us about that. Why are they doing this?
Yeah, we so far during the Black Lives Matter protests across the United States, so far I believe it's limited to the U.S., we've started seeing Boogaloo Boys showing up armed, heavy arms, usually with body armor, usually with Hawaiian shirts on, and they are showing up for a variety of reasons, but primarily because they want to either participate in or witness any sort of escalation with police or government forces. So they want to be there with weapons when the violence against police starts happening. This has led to a lot of the big Boogaloo groups on especially mainstream platforms actually coming out in solidarity with the Black Lives Matter protesters, saying, we have a united front here. We have similar cause. A lot of Boogaloo groups pass around this image of the Boogaloo flag it's like an American flag with an igloo in the top left corner. But it has names of people who have been murdered by police on it. And they often include Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Eric Gardner. So they really are, a lot of these more libertarian-centric Boogaloo Boys are attempting to reach out to Black Lives Matter protesters and even anti-fascists, and are trying to stand in solidarity with them during these protests.
Yeah. Now, I've done some research of that kind of crossover between left libertarian and right libertarian, or even, anarchist groups and whatever in the US. And I saw the the John Brown Gun Club in Steel City. They were doing something quite smart where they were kind of going with other with the right-wing libertarians and say, look, we don't get on, but we do both hate authoritarianism, so let's not have any Nazis at our protests. Now, do you think it's that kind of vibe, or do you buy into this story that some people are saying that actually they're just there to subvert it, they don't really care about black people, and they're just trying to ride the movement, if you like?
I think that there are a handful of, administrators of Facebook groups or more centrist, moderate, like let's say closer to the left libertarian style, Boogaloo Boys, who legitimately do want to stand in solidarity with black people in the United States. I think the primary component of the movement are right libertarians who are skeptical of anti-fascist, Black Lives Matter, and are more using this opportunistically as a way to ride the movement to escalation with police and hopefully in their eyes, hopefully an armed revolution. I think the far more dangerous problem is that there's also a small contingent of people who actually do actively want to subvert the protests and the movement and cause a race war. And those people are really hard to distinguish from the mainstream right libertarian Boogaloo Boys because they use the same language. They often show up in the skull face masks and Punisher logos, and they have the same look as Boogaloo Boys, but they occupy the very much the Nazi fringe of the movement.
I think that's a good way of putting it. It's a Nazi fringe to the Boogaloo. It's not that the Boogaloo is a Nazi movement, right?
Exactly. Yes.
People are saying to me, like, people said, "Oh, you're just making excuses for them." It's like, well, no, sorry. Like, maybe we should actually be accurate. Like, you have to be accurate with this. And I don't know. It's just a very weird situation. But I think that's what comes with not having a centralized movement, right? It's almost an ideology, I think, at this stage.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, you're exactly right. Like there is a group of people who subscribe to the Boogaloo movement who legitimately do want to put forward this more universalist I use the term universalist accelerationism in my article, I think. It's they want to stand in solidarity with everyone who is against authoritarianism, especially like this is especially true among the administrators of the big Facebook groups, which is fascinating to watch because as more and more media attention is paid to the Boogaloo Boys, they have become more and more obsessed with optics and presenting themselves as this movement for individual liberty, whether that's for black people or white people. And they have been really strongly attempting to walk back any association of the Boogaloo with civil war and that sort of thing. So you have that type of people for sure. But then you also have the people who yell about the Boogaloo on Telegram and on 4chan who definitely mean race war. They want to shoot protesters to try to spark some sort of armed confrontation that results in the extermination of black people. And so it's like the problem with any sort of efforts from the Boogaloo Boys to achieve solidarity is that they have to contend with that Nazi fringe who legitimately do want to murder the protesters as well as the police.
Yeah, no, I see what you mean. It's a tricky one. You sometimes see it with like Antifa where, well, not really in Europe, but it's the US I've noticed, where you'll get like anarchists who have to kind of say, hey, we're not with X group, which is like a tanky, like Stalinist. You're like, hey, we might be Antifa, they might say they're Antifa, but we're not them. You know what I mean? We're not the same as them. It's obviously the stakes are not as high, but it's a weird situation. You're talking about the organizing on the internet there. Like, how do they manage this? What? I mean, surely some people must have had to take a leadership role to organize online, even though it isn't a cohesive movement.
Yeah. So primarily, the Boogaloo Boys are organized into relatively small Facebook groups, but relatively small meaning like 10 to 15,000 likes, which is still pretty large in the frame of extremist movements, but relative to other Facebook groups. So these Facebook groups are the main units of organization so far for the Boogaloo movement. And they haven't been, as far as I've seen, they haven't been organizing coordinated action yet. Rather, what they're doing is like the administrators post, let's get people out at these different protests, and then individuals, small group, either like a single person or a small group of individuals will go out and show up in the Hawaiian shirt with a long gun and essentially either march with the protesters, or often what they've been doing is standing outside of businesses and quote unquote defending them from looters, which is another source of tension among these groups as well. But from an organizational perspective, it still is very much, it's decentralized, it's not coordinated so far, at least.
And do we know like the names? Are there any like guys specifically kind of putting themselves forward as like, I mean, not leaders, but they're leaders of Facebook groups, like you say, and there were people talking about optics and that. That's got to come from some kind of leadership.
Yeah, so the leadership of the Facebook groups especially are putting forward this focus on optics and this attempt to reshape the movement for something more universalist in nature. I don't know the names of those people yet, but like the biggest groups are the Boogaloo Bois, the Mujahideen memes. They use the term Mujahideen as well.
I saw that. I found that. I just found that very funny, man. Like, but the guy that said there was a video clip. The guy that said he was Mujahideen was actually very explicitly saying like, we're standing with black people. We recognize that they're oppressed and whatever. So you know, there was some people like, wow, he's Mujahideen, but it was like what he was saying was actually, it was fine. Like it was like, yeah, that's fair. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, several of these people are doing that. They're coming on, explicitly saying, getting on interviews, saying, we stand with black people. I'm a bit wary of the sincerity of a lot of this, because they also turn around and say that they'll shoot looters on sight and that they want to protect business at all costs. So this is really where the schism between the left libertarian Black Lives Matter and anti-fascist movement comes into where it comes into being, with the more right libertarian Ayn Rand, private property maximalist types, where the Boogaloo Boys will often aim to protect private property at all costs, even above, the life of a looter, for example. So there's definitely tension there, but there are people who I would say, from what I've seen, legitimately do believe that they stand in solidarity with the Black Lives Matter protesters.
Right, and how many Boogaloo Boys have we actually seen out on the protest, would you estimate? I've seen quite a few videos, but I've not been keeping count. It seems to me that there are quite a lot, but I don't know if that's because the media is going, wow, who are these, or what?
Yeah, it's still a relatively small number. I think the novelty of armed, Hawaiian shirt wearing, heavily body armored white men showing up at protests, ostensibly saying that they're in support of the protesters, is causing them to get a bit of an outsized media presence. I would say my best guess is like 20 to 30 across the country, but we've seen some high profile arrests as well. So there was a guy in Denver who was arrested with pipe bombs and a lot of illegal weaponry. There were 3 Boogaloo Boys in Las Vegas who were arrested for plotting attacks against police. They were actually arrested with Molotov cocktails in hand, I believe. So their presence at these protests has still been quite small, but they have presented they definitely present a disproportionate escalation risk because of their willingness to participate in that sort of political violence.
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to ask, actually. How serious are they? A lot of the lads that I talk to in the Boogaloo movement, well, not a lot, but I've done my research, and there's quite a few Boogaloo Boys will watch Popular Front, and the ones I talk to often will say, oh, it's just a joke, like we're not really serious. But then I'm seeing guys with, they know their weapons, clearly they're well armed. How serious do you think it is? Do you think really they're going to start shooting back, or what?
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest things that we track as extremism researchers is radicalization risk from communities that attempt to promote themselves as satire and irony, right? So like at some point, even if a movement was intentionally meant to be satirical or humorous, when people start taking it seriously, when that impact starts crossing over into the real world, which we've seen it happen, then you actually have to start taking the movement itself seriously. And so I think the issue with the Boogaloo movement especially is that their main difference from the Patriot movement is that their entire unifying ideology is this desire or glorification of an armed revolution, an armed insurrection against police. So when you have tens of thousands of people who legitimately interact with these communities, you're going to have people getting radicalized to believe that that is the right thing to do. And I think that we've seen this already. There have been, I think, 3 anti-fascists arrested so far, all in connection with looting a Target in Minneapolis. We've already seen 4 Boogaloo Boys arrested in connection with specific plots to attack and murder police officers. So I think there's just definitely a disproportionate level of harm compared to the 2 networks who are participating in this, even if there are Boogaloo Boys who legitimately believe that, Black Lives Matter is a good movement and that sort of thing.
So wait, there was a Boogaloo plot to murder the police?
Yes, the Las Vegas Boogaloo Boys who were arrested last week were arrested specifically in connection with a plot to murder police or government officials. They had Molotov cocktails in hand. They wanted to attack police forces.
But they were saying, like, yeah, we're gonna kill them, or I mean, a plot would suggest that they had some kind of intel at least, no?
That is so. I need to check on exactly how much intel they had or how much coordination they know about beforehand. But those Boogaloo Boys were connected. They were arrested in connection with plotting to attack police.
That's like stepping over the line quite far. They're not messing around.
Yeah, right. And one of those, so again, in illustration of the schism in this movement of the different factions, one of those Boogaloo Boys arrested in Las Vegas was of the white nationalist fringe. So it's like if I had to put a ranking on the most dangerous factions of the Boogaloo movement, the white nationalist Nazi fringe is definitely the most dangerous.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think you see that as well with a lot of like the US fascists. They kind of ride whatever wave is going, like, which is most popular, but they're still them, right? Like, they just move through different things, but they still have the same ideology. So yeah, it's a worry. Apart from the Nazi fringe, who, I mean, to be honest, from the work I've done on all of that in the US, they don't really have an idea of what they want after this so-called revolution. They just want to murder and live in this kind of wasteland. But what are the more like right libertarian, like Boogaloo Boys, like what do they actually want? They're saying they want a civil war, or they're kind of memeing about a civil war. But do any of them have any kind of utopia or some idea of what they want after that happens? Should they win? Obviously this is all never going to happen, but what do they want?
That's a really good question, and is another that I from what I've seen so far, that's another place where the Boogaloo Boys sort of span a pretty wide spectrum. So on the one hand, you have the libertarian sovereign citizen style of Boogaloo Boys who aim for some sort of utopian, anarcho-capitalist society where people organize around the posse comitatus, and you have local communities policing themselves through their local community sheriff without any sort of overarching government that is implementing regulations or laws upon their community. So there's very much that style of Boogaloo Boy. That sort of ideology is linked to a very long history in the United States, going back decades. On the other hand, the race war, Nazi fringe, they may not necessarily. Some of them definitely do want to just all they can conceive of is tearing down the government, bringing about societal collapse, starting the race war, and then living in some sort of wasteland. But there's also definitely a contingent of people who legitimately want to usher in a tyranny of white people over minorities. This is the sort of people, the sort of Boogaloo Boy who legitimately embraces, Nazi politics and dictatorship of the strong white man over everyone else.
Yeah, that is the real problem, because they are very strong still, right? Like in the US, the fascist fringe, despite being kind of crushed a little bit by the FBI and that, in times like this, I'm almost surprised they haven't done something. I mean, I don't know if you've seen it, but on the Telegram channels and stuff, they're talking about like using this to destroy infrastructure, like saying don't go to protest, but go and blow up the electric grid or whatever. Yeah.
The Telegram, the so-called Terragram network of Telegram channels have become kind of obsessed with this specific movement because they think that it's that moment where they have the opportunity to strike against infrastructure or police officers or government officials. Early on, one of the first days, one of the first days of the protests, one of the big Telegram channels said they just posted, this is a great time to get the bullets flying, and the implication being it doesn't matter who you kill, just go kill people. And that's the entire ideology behind that Nazi fringe, is they just want to kill whoever. This is that moment where the black people, like their two greatest enemies, are fighting against each other, like, minorities and police. So it's a fantastic time for them, in their eyes, to start that race war and exterminate two of their greatest enemies at the same time.
Yeah, I'm honestly amazed something serious hasn't happened yet. Like, I mean, obviously it's all serious. I mean, in regards to the fascists coming out and shooting people, like, thank fuck they haven't. But I just keep, like, every time I wake up and check it, I'm like, man, I just expect almost that they're going to do something. But I don't know. Hopefully they won't. Hopefully they get caught or something before they do. In terms of the more anti-authoritarian, libertarian type of Boogaloo Boys, do they talk about theory or anything like? Do they share theory? I mean, I guess, who would be there? Oh, I don't know. Like a big historical figure that I'm interested in would be Nestor Makhno, right? Who would be their Nestor? I mean, please tell me it's not fucking Ayn Rand. But do they do that? Do they talk theory in that, or is it not as deep as that?
It's not usually as deep as that. They tend to latch on to big libertarian figures, big libertarian activists, rather than philosophers. So, a lot of them definitely are inspired by and aspire to be Ammon Bundy and Cliven Bundy from the Bundy Ranch and the Malheur Wildlife Refuge Reserve showdowns over the past few years. They definitely idolize David Koresh and the family that was killed at Ruby Ridge. So they organize around these moments in time where the FBI showed, or the FBI or the United States government showed that they were willing to crack down on unarmed, peaceful Americans. So those are more of the style of figures and events that they organize around. They haven't gotten deep enough yet, as far as I've seen, to start interacting with actual philosophy.
That's interesting, though, that they're still talking about Ruby Ridge and Waco. Maybe just explain why that's relevant to them, for anyone. There's a lot of non-US listeners who won't know about that.
Yeah, so in the 1990s, the Patriot movement, sovereign citizens, like the right libertarian militia movement, really got started because of two major examples of government violence against American citizens. So these were essentially, they ended up being FBI shootouts with American citizens in Ruby Ridge and in Waco, Texas. So the Ruby Ridge example is when a family of Americans was suspected of, I believe it was suspected of illegally owning firearms, and they ended up in a shootout that resulted in the guy's wife getting killed, several people getting killed. And then in Waco, Texas, David Koresh, the leader of the Branch Davidians, which was this fringe religious movement in the 1990s, ended up stockpiling weaponry in his compound and getting in a firefight with the FBI that resulted in several people, I believe more than several people getting killed by FBI action. So these were two major organizing points for the right libertarian anti-government militia movement in the 1990s. And because they were just such clear examples of disproportionate force being used against American citizens who were, in their eyes at least, living completely legally, completely within their bounds. And so these two events radicalized a lot of people over the last 20 plus years in the United States. And still to this day, those two events are held up as the epitome of government excess, government oppression against Americans. And they've been added with some of so for the Boogaloo Boys, for instance, on that flag where they list George Floyd and Eric Gardner, they also list the people who were killed at Ruby Ridge sometimes. They list people who were killed in the 1990s by government force. So the Boogaloo Boys have established a sort of historical thread connecting all of these different events from Ruby Ridge all the way to George Floyd getting killed by the police.
Wow, that is so interesting, because if you are truly anti-authoritarian, then you don't pick and choose. You do go against anti-authoritarianism wherever it is. However, again, it always comes back to this thing of how sincere they are. Do you know what I mean? Which is, I don't know, who will know? And until they do kind of form an actual grouping, you don't actually know. You can't really judge it. But then if they do form a grouping, then I don't know. Is it a movement anymore? Is it just a group? In regards to that, I mean, are the FBI, is the police, are people like, you would imagine that the security or whatever in America is probably quite interested in this movement.
Yeah, they absolutely are, and I think the arrests of the Las Vegas Boogaloo Boys is probably the best example of that so far. I think that currently federal attention toward the Boogaloo Boys is complicated by messaging from the highest levels that the anti-fascists are actually the main threat. So I think it's pretty complicated, and their efforts to track the Boogaloo Boys have probably been hampered quite a bit from literally all of the counterterrorism units being essentially directed to work on anti-fascists rather than Boogaloo Boys. So there's definitely a sort of confounding factor there, which emanates from the presidency.
Yeah, well, that's a very weird situation. I mean, the whole like Trump going after Antifa, which again, it's not a group with members as such. It's 161, man. Like, it's anti-fascist action. It's whatever. It's very strange for him to have done that. Well, it's not strange for Trump to have done that, I guess. But talking about Trump, are there any like Boogaloo Trump boys? I mean, that would sound like stupid question maybe, but I do remember I used to follow the movements of the Michigan militia a lot years ago. And I mean, I'm talking like years ago, like in George Bush era. It was just something I was fascinated in as a teenager. And then all of a sudden, I remember a ton of them just became like pro-Trump. It was like, what kind of libertarians are you? I mean, is there any of that, like MAGA Boogaloo crossover?
Yeah, and funnily enough, I did some work on the Michigan militia myself, and one of the reasons why I've been so fascinated with the connection between the militias and the Boogaloo Boys is I talked to Norman Olson, who was one of the founders of the Michigan militia, or one of them, one of the militias, and I looked back recently at what he told me about his own movement, and it was very similar to the sort of ideologies that the Boogaloo Boys are spouting right now. So same sort of like, we want to work with, he actually said that he wanted to work with the Black Panthers in the 90s. He wanted to work with anyone who was anti-authoritarian. He had a very universalist sense of, or at least his way of presenting the Michigan militia was that it was very universalist and very welcoming to anyone who wanted to fight back against government oppression. So I just wanted to note that was one of the main reasons why I found that connection so strong. So on the other hand, so the Trump MAGA Boogaloo Boy intersection, I think of the actual quote unquote Boogaloo Boy Facebook groups and internet communities, there's not a ton of pro-Trump sentiment. It is pretty avowedly anti-government, anti-Trump. The nuance here is that the Boogaloo movement, as we've talked about, is very broad and goes beyond just the big igloo boys on Facebook. They're, even like we did some work a few months ago on the Proud Boys, and they also embrace similar sort of Boogaloo ideology. And the Proud Boys are very, very, very pro-Trump generally. So there's this, my best guess so far is that the intersection point is like the Proud Boys want armed confrontations with the Minneapolis police and the Minneapolis government because they're, liberal, leftist, left-leaning governments, whereas the Boogaloo Boys, the big igloo boys, the actual, libertarian Boogaloo movement wants armed confrontations with anyone, including the federal government. That's my best guess at the intersection there, but there are definitely people who call themselves adherents of the Boogaloo movement or Boogaloo Boys who are pro-Trump and very, very loudly pro-Trump.
Which makes no sense. I mean, like Trump, he's done quite a lot to kind of mess with the gun laws, right? Like he's brought in red flag laws. He banned bump stocks, I think. So he's done quite a lot to go against the whole like armed thing. And they're very pro 2A, right? What is it they actually generally believe in the gun rights? I mean, what they want more? They want what?
Yeah, so they want full blown, no laws essentially. Like a lot of them stockpile grenades and military grade equipment. So they're aggressively pro Second Amendment. They actually like their main sort of political activism. They got started as political activists in response to, Virginia's attempts to institute gun control legislation. They were very active in the earlier this year in early 2020 in response to gun control legislation across the United States. That was really how they got started organizing.
Yeah, so I saw a lot of them when that Virginia gun rights stuff was starting, talking about this guy Duncan Lemp, and he was like unarmed, right? He was killed by the police or something
Yes.
like that. What's the story behind that, if you know?
So he, talking about FBI slash police response to people alleged to have illegal possession of firearms, Duncan Lemp was believed to illegally own guns. And so there was a no-knock raid at his house, and he ended up getting killed by police during that raid. So because he actually was he had posted about the Boogaloo movement in the past, and he frequented 4chan and Reddit. He was a member of the three percenters. So he was definitely in that sort of far right pro Second Amendment community. And the fact that he was killed in a no knock raid, which is to the Boogaloo movement and to the anti-fascist, to essentially all anti-authoritarian movements, is one of the best, one of the biggest examples of government oppression in the United States. The fact that he was killed in that made him into essentially a martyr for the Boogaloo movement. And a lot of the Boogaloo Boys to this day still have like his name was Duncan Lemp painted on their the shields that they carry or their flags, or they carry signs at the protests that say that. A lot of times what they'll do is they'll write his name was Duncan Lemp, his name was George Floyd on the same sign and carry those around. So they definitely try to draw a comparison between the murder of Duncan Lemp and the murder of George Floyd.
Would you say that, I don't know, I mean, this is just my like read on it, but it seems that a lot of the Boogaloo Boys, whether they say it or not, their ideology is kind of like anarcho-capitalist, where they don't want any government at all, but they're not about like mutual aid and helping each other. It's kind of about like who can get the best stuff without any regulation, would you say?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I would describe them as anarcho-capitalists primarily, which is why you see a lot of them gleefully talking about murdering looters, and essentially as soon as they see them. And why you saw my favorite image is an image that came out, not from Minneapolis, but from one of the other cities where protests were happening, of Boogaloo Boys defending Hobby Lobby and Ross, like two big department stores in the U.S. that are massive corporations, right? So it's very, very incongruous with the Black Lives Matter anti-fascist movement that is fueling these protests. But that is their ideology. Like, they don't want government. They want, for lack of a better phrase, the hegemony of private property.
That'd be a very odd world. But anyway, whatever. Mate, this has been brilliant. Is there anything else you want to say before we kind of wrap this up?
No, I think we've covered all the big stuff that I can think of. The one thing that I try to make a point of mentioning is that while there are those right libertarian, universalist, patriot movement style people in the Boogaloo movement, it really cannot be separated from the white nationalism, white supremacist fringe, because it evolved directly alongside the same sort of white supremacist accelerationism that we see today. So they both evolved on 4chan in conjunction with each other with a lot of overlap. The Boogaloo Nazis and the Boogaloo libertarians. So it's one of those things where it's really, really hard to draw a line between them and to say, this movement is libertarian versus this movement is white supremacist. It's really, because it's so decentralized and so unorganized right now, there just is no way to make a clear distinction between those two groups.
Yeah, no, I agree. And some of them, they say like, "Oh well, you know, we're not racist. We're not racist." It's like, well, if you wanna really be about what you're saying, I think they have to make an explicit distinction. You know, they have to say we are not only not racist, we are the anti-racist Boogaloo Boys. And until they do that, I think they're just gonna keep getting linked in like that. You know.
Right, right. And I think what's interesting is you see a lot of the Facebook groups starting to try to make those moves. Like a lot of them, you know, one of the administrators I saw was coming on saying all Nazbols can fuck off, and we will come for you first. So, you know, Nazi Bolsheviks, or you know, Nazis in their terms. So like they are specifically saying that when the Boogaloo comes, they'll kill the Nazbols first. So that's like one of those interesting, you know, one of the interesting things that they're attempting to do these days is to try to differentiate themselves even more.
Killing Nazis, I can get behind that. Like that sounds fine. Okay, mate. Thank you very much. Where can people find your work, specifically on, you know, social media, and also this report you've written?
Yeah. So on Twitter, I'm at Alex B Newhouse, and you can find my work. Just search CTech at the Middlebury Institute. That's where I work at the Center on Terrorism, Extremism, and Counterterrorism.
Okay, mate. Thank you very much. That was great.
Yeah, thank you too. It was great to talk to you.
That was Alex Newhouse speaking about the Boogaloo Boys. Hopefully we've given you some insight into who they actually are now, because like I said at the start, there is a lot of misinformation. People seem to be screaming into the void, saying what they want it to be rather than what it actually is. But that's why this is Popular Front. Nuance, details, all of that. I know we're doing a lot of US coverage at the minute, and I know, like, you know, that it's been quite a lot with the bonus episodes as well on the Patreon. But, you know, it's a very, very big, unprecedented situation, to be honest, or at least unprecedented in the modern day on this scale, I think. You know, Ferguson there was a lot of rioting with that, but it wasn't sustained like this. And now there's all these situations where people are getting very political. There's this alleged autonomous zone open on Capitol Hill, which we will be doing a bonus episode about as well soon. But yeah, I think right now it's kind of important to focus on all this, because it is possibly going to be like, you know, a historic kind of global movement in some ways, whether it dies out or what. It's certainly been like a very, very big thing. It's spreading all over the place now. But yeah, like I said, as I mentioned, we are going to have bonus episodes on this, and there's loads of other bonus episodes, 60 of them, and counting, at least 2 a month on the Patreon. So if you want to support us and get the bonus content, please do go to patreon.com/popularfront. That's where you'll hear all of that. There's so much more content on there, extra stuff. And yeah, it helps us go. It helps us keep moving, because this is anti-corporate. We are not having big corporate deals. We are not having venture capitalists coming in here and saying, hey, here's the money, go and do this. Nah. We're trying to do this all grassroots, and we'll stay this way. So go to patreon.com/popularfront, subscribe there for $5 or more. Or you can go to popularfront.co/support. You can donate money via Bitcoin or a one-off payment on PayPal, other things as well. So yeah, go there. Also follow us on social media. On Twitter it's popularfrontco. On Instagram it's at popular.front. YouTube /popularfront. I think that's all of it. Yeah, I think so. We've got a Substack, which I kind of update now and then. If you go to popularfront.substack.com, just like an email mailing list, we'll put certain bits up on there. But yeah, all of that. If you want to follow me, go twitter.com/Jake_Hanrahan, HANRAHAN. Check out my previous work at jakehanrahan.com. This episode today is sponsored by Oracle Coffee Shop in Portland, Oregon, USA. They're an independent coffee shop selling only fair trade products. See them at 3875 Southwest Bond Avenue, 97239. Tell them Popular Front sent you. Absolutely, make sure you tell them you came there because of Popular Front. You might get some, I don't know, free coffee or something, who knows. They're back open, I think they're back open, maybe limited service because of lockdown and that. But yeah, the episode is also sponsored by Feng Tings. Custom Bofeng Radios. Go and look at them. You can order stuff at instagram.com/feng.tings. I can't speak today. FENG.TINGZ or Z if you're an American. Fengtings, check them out. Thank you very much to our higher tier patrons. Honestly, you lot keep this afloat month on month. They are Adam Bergsnyder, Alex Northrop, Amy Rupert, Andrew Hurley, Anthony Kabarak, Axel Iverson, Azad, Bill Wilson, BREN86, Brian McLaughlin, Trey Nance, Chad Walker, Chandler Malin, let me know if I've said that wrong, mate, Charlie, Chris Cusimano, Chris Davis, Christina Rovetti, Christopher Martin, Clayton Taylor, DR, Dan Dunham, Daniel Shearer, Degenerate Zero Alpha, sounds like Blade Runner or something, Diana Gorvanek, Don Wayne, Ed Coulthard, Emiliano, Emily Molly, Fitz Madrid, Fletcher Tate, Fragile Feeling, Frank Austin, Hugo Newski, Joanne Stocker, Joe Watt, Johnny LaFleur, Josh, Lawrence Abrahams, Liam Williams, Maxwell Burke, Moritz Zumbwal, Moody Al Rashid, Ari from the Discord, Olin Thorne, Patrick Bronte, Peter McCormick from What Bitcoin Did, and fucking hell, what is his other podcast called, man? Defiant, there you go. Prashant Singh, Q Ball, Rubicon, Ryan Sandercock, Scar Tuna Music, Sebastian from the Discord, Surishe Hawazi, Stephen Davila, Tony Bin, Trans Rights Are Human Rights, that's a very long name you've got, Vida Provost, thank you very much. I don't know if someone's put that in. I hope someone hasn't put their name like that to be like, make him say it. I agree with that 100%. Thank you very much. But yeah, man, thanks for the support. Yeah, so like I said, if you want to support us, patreon.com/popularfront. This episode, the intro was by Home and the outro was by Sam Black, also known as Son of Old. Listen to his music at samblackpf.com and be sure to share it about with everyone.